What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Mailari. So today is the start of the NBA playoffs. I'm going to give my predictions for my entire bracket at the end. Going to start off with some NBA storylines and a recap of the last couple months in the NBA. Haven't really talked too much basketball in a while. Haven't really had an episode in about 3 weeks or so. So I'm going to catch up on some things going on in the NBA, and then I will dive into my NBA playoff predictions. So let's start off with the MVP race between Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Thunder and then Nikola Jokic of the Denver Nuggets. Although Jokic had a ridiculous stat line, 30, 13, and 10 on the season, 30 points, 13 rebounds, 10 assists a game, SGA's 33 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, while being on the best team in the NBA in the regular season, that warrants the MVP award in my eyes. I know Jokic had a great season, and I'm not trying to take away from that, but SGA wasn't the best team in the NBA in the regular season and put up some ridiculous numbers. I know he put up basically half the rebounds and half the assists that Jokic did, but he was on the best team in the NBA. Jokic's numbers were better, and he had better shooting splits, but the fact that OKC was the best team in the NBA without many household names yet besides SGA, I think SGA deserves the MVP award. Credit to OKC, though. They're a young team building the right way, still with a lot of money to spend, and then a plethora of draft capital as well. They're going to have some cash to spend in the offseason and probably have some draft picks as well that they can move to go out and get a big piece. You can't use all of the draft picks that they have, so they're going to go out and get a big player, maybe somebody like Kevin Durant. We'll see how things work out. But they can go and add, supreme talent this offseason. Now moving on to the LA Clippers. They're getting hot at the right time. Kawhi Leonard and James Harden were back-to-back Western Conference Players of the Week in back-to-back weeks, so that's obviously huge to see. The Clippers are 18-3 in their last 21 games, and ever since the last time I spoke about the Clippers, which was probably about 2 months ago almost, it feels, but it was really like a month and a half ago, they've been on a tear. The Clippers have played great basketball since I was last on air, live on WCBC Radio after their loss against the Phoenix Suns. They had a 23-point collapse against Phoenix on March 4th. And a day or two after that, I was live on air, and I just remember being so down on the team at that point. Losing a 23-point lead to a Phoenix team that was struggling defensively and overall over the past month heading into that game. Phoenix was on a really bad downtrend. The Clippers are up 23 points in the second half, and they collapsed. And that was probably the last time I talked basketball. And the last time I talked with the Clippers on here, I was just very, very disappointed in them. I was very down on them. I never saw them getting to where they're at right now. At that point, I just thought that Clippers team was unserious, and I thought they were incomplete. But boy, was I wrong. Norman Powell being healthy is huge. So you add him back into the lineup. That's obviously great to see. He's starting to get back on track. He's still not the player he once was before the injury, but that doesn't really matter at the end of the day because Kawhi Leonard is looking like the Toronto Kawhi Leonard, which is awesome, and that's important for this team's success. Probably this is the best he's looked as a Clipper. And then James Harden has completely stopped Father Time, and he's still putting up big-time numbers. And then you added the presence of Ivica Zubac, who's been on a tear in the paint. He has been awesome and has grown so much on each end of the floor this year. He's been a legitimate top 5 to 7 center in the NBA this year. When you add all of that together, the Clippers have completely turned things around since that loss. They're 18-3 over their last 21 games since that loss. And Zoo, who went from averaging just 12 points and 9 rebounds last year, has averaged 17 points and 13 rebounds a game just about, with 58 double-doubles this season when he only had 23 last season. So they've had a lot of guys step up overall this season, and then obviously since that loss to Phoenix. I'm just so impressed and happy with the way they've played, and no matter what happens in the playoffs, this team is resurrected, and they're playing their best basketball at the best time, just like Dallas was last year heading into the playoffs. They're very similar to that team. Being a 4 or 5 seed with 2 stars, Kyrie Irving and then Luka Doncic, and then obviously this Clippers team having Kawhi and James Harden. And they were playing their best hoops at the right time last year, Dallas. And the Clippers are right now too. They're red hot heading into the playoffs. And we all know what happened with that Dallas team. Making it to the NBA Finals, obviously, even though a lot of people did count that team out. And I know I did for a long time last year watching them in the playoffs. But once it got past OKC, I said, okay, this team's a little bit different. So I'm hoping with this Clippers team, if they can make a run and get past Denver, getting past Oklahoma City won't be easy. But I do think the Clippers can keep it close with Oklahoma City. I do. I think they can keep it close with OKC. I do think Houston would have been a better matchup for the Clippers. In the event that we lost to Golden State in the regular season finale, and then we won the play-in game versus Memphis, we would have faced Houston. But I do think this roster getting some rest is huge. And plus, you never want to risk losing in the play-in tournament. You never know what could happen when you jump in the play-in tournament. And then you add in the fact that if you do indeed want to make a run to the finals, you have to go through Oklahoma City anyways at some point. So if you're going to face them in the second round, you're not going to avoid them much more than that. You're going to play them either in the second round or the third round anyways. So you're not going to be able to avoid them forever. And now I'm going to dive into some of the numbers. The Clippers had the third best defensive rating in the NBA this season, which is obviously their identity, defense. And then obviously making some big-time shots at big-time moments with James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, playmaking and shot-making in big-time moments. And here's another impressive stat, and this comes from Clutch Points on Twitter. Teams are averaging 6.7 points fewer per 100 possessions when Ivica Zubac is on the floor. Add in the fact that the Clippers have the second best half-court defense in the league, holding opponents to just 94.6 points per 100 possessions. So you see their identity is defense, and their anchor in the paint is Ivica Zubac. He has been tremendous for them this season. And at one point before the last game of the regular season, the Clippers had a 15-game stretch where they were number one in wins in the NBA, number one in offensive rating, number one in defensive rating, number one in net rating, number one in defensive rebounds per game, number one in field goal percentage per game, number one in three-point percentage, and number one in plus minus, and number one in opponent second chance points allowed. And credit to Clip Fully Loaded on Twitter for all of those stats. But the Clippers were on an absolute tear over the last 15 to 20 games of the season. And were playing the best basketball in the NBA over that stretch. And if you look at it, it wasn't just defense. And I know a lot of those things I just mentioned, a lot of that was defense, but then obviously offense came into play with field goal percentage and three-point percentage and stuff like that. But James Harden has been awesome for this team. 25 points per game with 62% total shot percentage in the last 25 games. Over his last 29 games, 25.4 points per game, 5.9 rebounds, 8.8 assists, 37% from three, 1.6 steals, and 0.9 blocks per game. He has been absolutely balling. And he's completely turned back time for this Clippers team, putting the team on his back in big-time moments when Norman Powell was hurt and Kawhi Leonard was hurt. James Harden was the guy for this team. And speaking of Kawhi Leonard, he's 15-4 in his last 19 games played, with 25.7 points per game, 7.1 rebounds per game, 3.4 assists per game, alongside 43% from three, 53% from the floor, and 1.9 steals per game. All of those are very impressive numbers. And then you add in the fact he's playing in back-to-backs at one point, did play in a back-to-back over that stretch, and he's averaging 36 minutes per game over his last 19 games played. So he's not just putting up these minutes in scattered nights. He's showing up every single night and playing big-time minutes for this Clippers team. And playing in a back-to-back was pretty impressive considering that's not something he's really done over the past couple seasons. And rightfully so. I mean, the injuries in the past are definitely something that the Clippers do fear and obviously worry about. So they're going to try to obviously make sure he's healthy and rested and doesn't get overworked. And I completely understand that. And now you're seeing, when you play Kawhi Leonard, the amount of games they played him this season, and you do manage his minutes, you're seeing the best Kawhi Leonard at the end of the season. And if you look at this Clippers team last year, when they had Russell Westbrook and Paul George, with the Big Four, the Clippers had 51 wins overall, which was a good season. They were the 4 seed. That was with 68 games of Kawhi Leonard. Then this year, they only get 37 games out of Kawhi and don't have Russell Westbrook and don't have Paul George. And the Clippers had just one less win than they did last season, 50 wins overall, and they're the 5 seed. That's very impressive. And I said before the season began that the Clippers reallocated the money that they offered to Paul George very well. Getting Nick Batum, getting Derrick Jones Jr., who is the most underrated player on this team, in my opinion, getting Chris Dunn. All of those were great additions to this lineup. And they're all guys that can play off the ball, play complementary to James Harden and Kawhi Leonard and Norman Powell, and can play defense. That was huge getting those 3 guys in this lineup. So we'll see how the Clippers fare in this playoff series against Denver. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute, just after I finish some of these NBA headlines. But I just want to say I'm very impressed with the way they've played. I did give up on this team at one point. Losing that 23-point lead to the Phoenix Suns in the second half, with Colin Gillespie going off and Kevin Durant going off in the fourth quarter, That was disappointing, especially considering that Phoenix team was falling apart at that moment. That 10-game stretch before that, they were really struggling, and they somehow came back and beat the Clippers, and the Clippers completely folded in that game. I was very disappointed. But you know what? They completely turned it around after that. They saw 21 games to figure things out and get back on track, and they did that. They're playing the best basketball at the right time. And we'll see how they do in the playoffs. We'll get to that in just a minute. Now moving on to Damian Lillard, who is officially cleared from deep vein thrombosis. He's still going to miss game 1 today, but he's averaging 25 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists on the year. He missed his last 14 games. He's been out since March 18th with a serious condition that he had to tend to. Very surprising to see him back so quick. I just saw on ESPN they were saying that no doctors really expected him to be back this fast, especially, to be ready to play in the playoffs at some point. I'm sure that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to do whatever it took to get back on the floor for the playoffs. He's going to be out for game 1, but there is a chance he plays in game 2. Milwaukee did have a good season. I still don't think they have what it takes to contend, even in a weaker Eastern Conference. It's important to note they have won 8 in a row. They were 10-4 without Damian Lillard. If things do fall apart early for them in the playoffs this season, I would not be surprised to see Milwaukee move on from Damian Lillard in a potential trade this offseason. Now moving on to the Denver Nuggets, who just fired their head coach over the past week and a half. Mike Malone and their GM, Calvin Booth, both got fired by the Denver Nuggets. Malone was the winningest coach in franchise history for Denver, just 2 years removed from a finals ring. They fired him with 3 games left in the regular season, which I think is a disservice to the whole team. I understand that there was a disconnect between Malone and Booth, the GM. So that dysfunction, I guess, was something that was a distraction to the whole team. And maybe Nikola Jokic and the rest of the guys were sensing that, and they obviously maybe felt a disconnect as well. Seems like things just started to fall apart right before they fired Malone. They had a 4-game losing streak at the time, and ownership felt like Malone and Booth were not fixing the issues that needed to be addressed, so they ended up moving on from both of them. Booth did miss on a few things since they won their ring, such as letting KCP go, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and Bruce Brown, then even Jeff Green as well, losing 2 key role players and then a veteran in Jeff Green. Those were 3 big losses that they never really made up, and I know they wanted to see, guys step up like Julian Strawther and Christian Brown and Peyton Watson, which I'm a fan of Peyton Watson. I like Christian Brown. 2 very good players, I think. But obviously, at the end of the day, they needed those veteran guys because they just mixed so well with Jokic and Murray and Gordon and DeAndre Jordan. You needed to keep some of those guys like KCP or Bruce Brown. You couldn't let both of those guys walk. So they end up moving on from Booth. They end up moving on from Malone. I thought they should have maybe waited for the season to end, but at the end of the day, the sports world, the NBA, and then sports in general, it's an unforgiving business. Your resume and your past success do not matter if your current win-loss record is subpar and the expectations aren't being met, that ownership wants. That's just a reality of the sports world. I was shocked that they fired Mike Malone, considering Denver's still the 4th seed in the West, and they're just 2 years past winning the NBA Finals. I think he'll get picked up pretty quick. My guess is either San Antonio if Greg Popovich retires, or the New York Knicks if they have an early exit and Tom Thibodeau is fired. We'll see how things work out there. The Memphis Grizzlies also fired their head coach, getting rid of Taylor Jenkins just about 3 weeks ago now. Memphis was 44-29 before this firing. They were the 5th seed in a loaded Western Conference when he was fired, but they were on a 10-game skid right around the time he was let go. And at one point early on, they were a top team in the Western Conference and then just had a really bad stretch for a couple months. It was a little shocking since there were only 10 games left in the regular season when they fired him. But if you asked me, does Memphis have a chance and do they have what it takes to win it all right now? I would say no. So I guess if they want to move on from Jenkins and see if they can really get a spark from someone else, I get it at the end of the day. I did hear his rotations were questionable at times, so I get maybe moving on and trying to get somebody in there that's a new eye and obviously would have a new rotation. We'll see how things work out for Memphis in the playoffs. They do have a tough matchup against Oklahoma City. Now moving on to the Phoenix Suns, which they're a very interesting topic. They did fire their head coach, Mike Budenholzer, after just 1 year into his 5-year, $50 million deal. They had some issues with him in the locker room. He had an issue connecting with the stars and also connecting with the locker room as a whole. He had a fallout with Bradley Beal after he told Bradley Beal he wanted to play less like Bradley Beal of the past, just wanted to focus on offense. He wanted Beal to play more like Drew Holiday, have a little bit more defensive upside, and also, maybe play off the ball a little bit more, and that's not what Bradley Beal wanted to do. There was a disconnect between Beal and Budenholzer. We obviously saw at one point during the regular season, Budenholzer and Kevin Durant arguing on the sidelines during that 23-point comeback against the Clippers. That was earlier on in that game when they were down 23, and then obviously things worked out and they ended up winning that game. But obviously, you could sense that there was a disconnect between Budenholzer and a lot of those guys in that team. They became just the third NBA team ever to start the year 8-1 and miss the playoffs. So they started the year very hot, and then everything just went downhill. So you might ask, what went wrong in Phoenix this season? Well, I don't think it's just a 2024-2025 problem. It's not just a this season problem. This team has lacked defense. It's lacked depth in each of the last two seasons. You add in the fact that Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant cannot coexist in the same lineup on the same floor. They all want the ball. They all want to be the primary scorer. It just doesn't work. There's only one ball at the end of the day, and none of those guys really want to sacrifice. I know Beal did go to the bench at one point and played well at times off the bench, but at the end of the day, these guys didn't want to, not be the primary scorer. They all wanted the ball in big-time moments. And this team didn't even have that many big-time moments. They didn't have any defense, so they were down a lot in games, especially late in the game. They weren't really in many close games over the last couple months. It just seemed like this team is just completely checked out, and they were completely checked out since probably the All-Star break, it seemed, watching that team play. I don't think Bradley Beal is washed. I think he can still hoop, but he isn't used to being off the ball and obviously being a third option. He's not used to either of those things. So I think that was the problem there. I know they want to move on from him, but he does have a no-trade clause, so it's going to be tough to move on from him unless they try to tie some draft picks with him, which I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I don't think Budenholzer was necessarily the main issue. It's the defense and the depth on this team. They've obviously tried 3 head coaches now over the last 3 years, and it hasn't worked out. Most of the players in Phoenix do not have a defensive identity. That is a major issue. And then obviously the depth, like I said, especially off the bench, they just don't really have enough to compete in the Western Conference without, those 3 guys on the floor. They don't really have anybody. Once those 3 guys are on the bench, Beal, Booker, and Durant, they don't really have anybody that they can go to in a big moment to score to try to keep them in the game when those guys are getting rest. They finished the year 36-46. At some point, Matt Ishbia, the owner, and the Phoenix Suns executive team need to look at themselves and see that firing a former NBA champion head coach every single offseason isn't a winning formula. You need to create consistency to try to win. You need to create consistency in the locker room, game plan-wise, rotation-wise. You need to create consistency and create a consistent, relationship between the GM and the head coach. And that's obviously something that they have not had over the past 3 seasons. It's easy to blame the head coach and move on from them after each year, but the reality is this big 3 didn't work together. You could see that after the first season and now even after the second season, you can see this big 3 did not work well together. And after they brought in 2 different head coaches over the past 2 seasons, they gave up on both of those guys after 1 year. They won 49 games last year with Frank Vogel in the 2023-2024 season. They were the 6th seed and then ended up getting swept in the first round against the Minnesota Timberwolves. But one difference between last year and this year is they were the number 13 defensive team in the NBA last season under Frank Vogel in the 2023-2024 season. This year, they're the 3rd worst NBA team in defensive efficiency, and they were the 2nd worst since the All-Star break in defensive efficiency. And that is a stat there from ESPN Research. So defense wasn't even the main issue last year necessarily. It was more of the lack of depth. But it was definitely an issue. 13th is middle of the pack in the NBA. But then this year, 3rd worst in the NBA. So that means they were 28th in defensive efficiency this season. That's a major issue. Then you add in the fact that they obviously had a formula that worked. They did make it to the NBA Finals in 2021 with Monty Williams. And then the following season, in the 2022-2023 season, they went out, they traded Kevin Durant, went all in, which I don't fault them for. I'm never going to fault a team for going all in. And I honestly respect it when a team goes all in. They trade their draft picks. They trade some of their young players because they want to win right now. I always respect that. And at the end of the day, I know a lot of people are going to look back and say, this trade was a mistake and this move was a mistake. But at the end of the day, you never know that in the moment. Hindsight's always going to be 20/20. You're always going to look back and say, I wish I did this and I wish I did that. That's just life at the end of the day. So I don't fault the Suns for going out and getting Kevin Durant. But before they had KD, this team was in a position with a nice young core, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton. They had a good lineup and a good roster and had guys that could play off the ball like Mikal Bridges, like Cam Johnson, that could play defense, add some hustle in that lineup. And when you go out and you trade for Kevin Durant, you obviously lose a lot of draft capital and you lose those 2 young players. And KD with Devin Booker, honestly, that year in 2023 in the playoffs, they were honestly decent. They looked well. They looked good together with Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton. Then that following offseason, once that season ended, they went out and they got Bradley Beal. And that ended up being a miss. Now they're in a really tough spot, not really knowing what they can do next. So you might ask, what can they do next? Where they are at right now, what can this Phoenix Suns team do? Well, it's clear that the sun is set in Phoenix. I've said that before, and I'm going to say it again. The sun has set in Phoenix. In order to get back on track, they have no option but to trade Kevin Durant. That's their only option. You're not going to trade Devin Booker, who's on the youngest side, and Bradley Beal has a no-trade clause. So the only option is to trade Kevin Durant. Then with whatever you get back in return for Kevin Durant, which I think will be probably around 2 unprotected first-round picks and a pick swap, depending on the team. Maybe a team can overspend, add in a young player as well. Oklahoma City is a team that has so many draft picks, just like the San Antonio Spurs, just like the Houston Rockets. They could go out and get Kevin Durant and even overspend and add in a couple extra picks if they want. Oklahoma City has too many draft picks to use. They could go out and get any player in the NBA that they want, and they'll ultimately probably do that at some point since they cannot use all of those picks that they have. But let's say Kevin Durant gets you 2 unprotected firsts and a pick swap. They'll probably take some of that draft capital and they'll trade it to a team like Utah to offload the Bradley Beal contract. That's my guess. Phoenix will take the draft picks they get for Durant and use some of them to move on from Bradley Beal's contract and trade it to a team like the Utah Jazz. Obviously, Beal would have to sign off of that and with his no trade clause, but we'll see. I don't think he probably wants to be in Phoenix for long anyways. If they're in a rebuild, I know he gets paid either way, but maybe he wants to be, potentially bought out by a team like the Utah Jazz, who could go out and do that because they have, no big-time contracts besides Lauri Markkanen, and they also don't really have, a position right now to go out and contend right now and win, so they would rather take those draft picks and rebuild, and stack those draft picks up, like they have for the past couple seasons. But for the Phoenix Suns, they have no option but to blow things up. They missed the playoffs and the play-in tournament this season with the largest payroll in NBA history, which proves that spending does not necessarily equate to winning. I've talked about this in the past. Spending can equate to winning, but it's all about putting in the right ingredients into your lineup. You need the right pieces in your lineup. If you're spending just to spend at the end of the day, that doesn't work. You need to put in the right pieces and have a nice core and, really put complementary pieces alongside each other. And obviously this just proves that having the largest payroll in NBA history doesn't mean you're going to win the NBA Finals or even make the playoffs for that matter. It's a long season. It's 82 games. You know just about everything about every team after 82 games. How they play offense, how they play defense, what their rotations look like, who the best player is, who their weakest player is, what they do in crunch time. You could see all of that through 82 games. So you could tell this Phoenix Suns team, even if they made the playoffs, they made the play-in tournament, this was not a championship team. No matter what went right or what went wrong, in certain moments, this team could not put it together and win an NBA Finals ring. They can't. So it just only makes sense for them to rip things up and completely, tear things down. Try to get rid of Durant, and then maybe if they can, try to get rid of Beal as well. And then they'll try to, build around Devin Booker. But at the end of the day, with this new CBA, you're in a really tough position. If you want to have 3 big-time contracts like Booker, Beal, and Durant, you're in a really tough spot trying to fill out the rest of your roster. And that's why the Clippers did really well this offseason. Letting Paul George go was obviously a tough moment, but like I said when he left, it might be a good thing for us at the end of the day because then you can really start adding the right pieces around Harden and Kawhi Leonard. And Kawhi Leonard and Harden were the 2 guys of the big 4 that I wanted back this season. During last offseason, I said those are the 2 guys I want back. If Russell Westbrook and Paul George were back, I would have been happy because I like both players. And PG is a big reason I'm a Clippers fan today. So I'm always going to owe him that, and I'm always going to be a fan of his and root for him. But the reality is, Harden and Kawhi Leonard look like they did mesh better than, let's say, Paul George and James Harden, for example. Or Kawhi Leonard and Russell Westbrook, for example. Like, the Clippers made the right decision pairing these 2 guys and keeping these 2 guys together. As a Phoenix, they're in a really tough spot. Because unlike the Clippers, who were able to add, Derrick Jones Jr., Nick Batum, and even Ben Simmons, getting him after he's bought out by Brooklyn, the Clippers had the luxury of being able to do all of that because they were under the luxury tax. They were under that second threshold, that second apron, that would have prevented them from going out and get some of these players. But you know what? Phoenix is in a completely different position. Because they have the largest payroll in NBA history, they couldn't go out and get Ben Simmons and add some depth to their bench, which they could still use a playmaking point guard to try to facilitate that offense since everybody wants the ball. They really weren't in a position to win with this lineup. With those 3 guys that all want the ball and a lack of depth and a lack of defense, it just wasn't going to work. So the sun is officially set in Phoenix. So now I'm going to move on and talk about the NBA playoffs and give my predictions. We'll start off in the Eastern Conference. The 1 seed Cleveland versus the number 8 seed Miami. Donovan Mitchell has been sensational this season. Darius Garland has been as well. Garland is a guy that everybody gave up on last year. Heading into this season, a lot of people were down on him, but he's going to be a huge part of their run in the Eastern Conference. He reminds me of Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown, everybody gave up on just about 2 years ago now. After the 2022-2023 season ended, a lot of people were down on Jaylen Brown, and then the Celtics obviously keep him. They don't move on from him. And then he ends up being a big-time reason they end up winning the NBA Finals in the 2023-2024 season. So I think Darius Garland is a guy that reminds me of Jaylen Brown. Obviously, Jaylen Brown, as I said, a lot of people gave up on just about a year before. The Celtics figured it out and ended up winning an NBA Finals ring. And if this is the same year that Cleveland figures it out, I think it'll be a similar situation. People will look at Darius Garland in a little bit different of a way if Cleveland ends up, going on a sensational run like the Celtics did last year with Jaylen Brown. This Cleveland team has a lot of shooters, which helps stretch the floor. DeAndre Hunter was a great addition for them at the trade deadline. Adding him to an already strong lineup, you could never have too many shooters on the floor at once, so adding him is obviously a great add. And then you look at Evan Mobley, he's been great defensively. Jared Allen's been good defensively. So this Cleveland team is different. I think they're different than they've been in years past. I know they've found ways to lose in the playoffs in the past, but I think this team's a little bit different this year. As in Miami, they always find ways to make things interesting. They have a lockdown defender and a relentless hustler in Davion Mitchell, my favorite player in the NBA. He's right up there with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, De'Aaron Fox, Donovan Mitchell. I'm a big-time fan of Davion. He is an absolute stud and a guy that will always give you everything he's got, no matter the score, no matter the situation. You will always find him giving it his all each and every play. This team, though, for Miami, I don't think they have what it takes to make a run like they have in years past. Obviously, Jimmy Butler's gone now, and I know they've made a run in the past, as an 8 seed, but I don't think that happens this year. Tyler Herro is an absolute hooper, and he's going to put up big-time numbers and put up, some big-time scoring performances. I'm a big fan of his. I like Khalil Ware a lot. I like Davion Mitchell a lot. I like Bam Adebayo. I do like this team, and I like this core of guys. And Khalil Ware is a guy that I think has a very bright future in the NBA. But I don't think this team has what it takes to really make a run, with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think Cleveland wins this series in 5. Next up, we have number 4 Indiana versus number 5 Milwaukee. Lillard will be out for game 1 at least, but I know Milwaukee will be happy to have him back at some point. Depth is an issue for this Milwaukee team with or without Lillard. Giannis is the best player in the series, but Indiana has a great rim protector in Miles Turner. Milwaukee's game plan is going to be to try to get Turner in foul trouble to open up some space in the paint for Giannis. The X factor for Indiana, in my opinion, is Pascal Siakam, who is the most underrated star in the NBA. Each and every night, he does a little thing that adds up to a team winning a game that doesn't really get talked about enough. He is a very big-time player, in my opinion, and a guy I always would take on my team. Indiana is 6-1 in April, 17-7 since March. They're playing good hoops at the right time. As I said, 17-7 between March and April. Indiana has young talent in Andrew Nembhard and Benedict Mathurin. Mathurin is going to shine for this Pacers team during this playoff run. I think the same goes for Nembhard as well. I think Mathurin is another X factor for this team, a guy that goes under the radar, doesn't really get enough credit. But I think he's going to grow his name during this playoff run. I think a lot of people are going to start giving him more attention and talking about him more on ESPN. I think he's going to shine for this team during this playoff run. I think this team is the most dangerous team in the East. I think they have what it takes to make a potential deep run. I think Rick Carlisle is an excellent coach. Even with the depleted lineup last year against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, he gave the Celtics 4 hard-fought games with Halliburton hurt and the Pacers being up. And I think it was 2 of those 4 games late. I know they lost those games ultimately, but to have a good lead in 2 of those 4 games without your best player, Tyrese Halliburton, and the rest of the roster still being banged up, it was very impressive. Carlisle was an excellent head coach. He had a great play design, which this was a play about sometime in March to beat Oklahoma City. I think the Pacers were down 3 points. They got the ball to Tyrese Halliburton around a screen. He runs to the corner, gets the inbounds pass, turns before he can get fouled. So, put him at the free throw line to shoot 2 shots. He gets a 3-pointer off. Oklahoma City's defender has a hand right in his face, hits a big-time 3 in a big-time moment, and then ends up getting a 4-point play, was fouled, put at the free throw line, ended up being the game-winning play. That was an excellent play design by Rick Carlisle to get a quick shot up before the Oklahoma City Thunder could foul, and that obviously was a big win there for the Pacers over the Thunder. I think this series here is going to be an upset. I think Indiana wins this series. I want to say 5 games. I'm going to say in 6 games. I worry about the Bucks scoring. If Lillard doesn't come back quick enough and their defense, doesn't really step up, which that's been an issue for them at times, is defense. And I don't think it's going to change for the better right now in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to become, defensive-minded team. I'm worried about this team scoring-wise and depth-wise. I think Indiana wins this series in 6 games. As I said, Indiana is a team to not mess around with in the East. This team is playing good basketball at the right time, 17-7 since March, beating some good teams over that stretch as well. I think teams should watch out for them. Now moving on to the number 3 Knicks versus number 6 Detroit Pistons. The Knicks have struggled against teams with a record over 500 this season. They finished just 15-23 versus winning teams this season. I know they were banged up. They had injuries all year long. Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, Mitchell Robinson were all hurt at one point, for extensive, periods of time. But they've struggled to put wins together against better teams. The Pistons have beaten them 3 or 4 times this season. And even if the Knicks, didn't have all of their guys in those games, the Pistons still found ways to beat them. The Pistons are a young, athletic, and tall team. They have good size, good roster depth as well, can shoot the ball well. They added some guys this offseason that have stepped up for them in big moments this year. One guy being Tobias Harris, another one being Malik Beasley. 2 veterans they added to that roster that really, meshed well with the guys they have. The Knicks have more talent overall, and I do like their roster. I like Karl-Anthony Towns a lot. I like Mikal Bridges a lot. OG Anunoby, Jalen Brunson, they have a lot of talent, but I worry about their size against Detroit. I'm a big fan of Jalen Duren. He's a very underrated player. Asad Thompson, the brother of Amin Thompson, is an unreal talent just like his brother. They're both very good defensively and both have great athleticism. This Pistons team is a team that not a lot of people expected much of this year, so just making the playoffs is huge for them. They had the 6th largest increase in wins from one year to the next in NBA history, with 30 more wins this season than they had last year. They're a very young team. Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren, Asad Thompson are all making their playoff debuts today. I know Detroit is inexperienced, but a lot of people overlooking this team. They're overlooking them as a whole because they're young and obviously inexperienced in the playoffs. I think they could be an interesting team and an underestimated team like Minnesota was last year. I feel the same way about Indiana this year being, like that Minnesota team last year that a lot of people overlooked. I think the same goes here even with this Detroit team. I think a lot of people are underestimating this team, just like I said with Indiana this year too. I'm going to go with Detroit winning this series in 7 games. That's another surprise pick. I know a lot of people don't expect Detroit to win this series, but the reason why I'm going with Detroit is because they're a young team, as I said, athletic, obviously a lot of size. That's something that the Knicks don't really match up well with, is size, a team that has a lot of height. And obviously Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, 2 guys that have good size in the paint. I think that could be a problem there for the Knicks, is the lack of depth as well. The Pistons have pretty good depth. I do think the Knicks have a better roster and a lot more star power, as you can tell. And when you have a guy like Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns and Anunoby and Bridges, and Josh Hart as well, they have a really good roster and a really good team. But for some reason, they always find ways to lose in the playoffs. I know injuries have been a problem for them in the past. Tom Thibodeau, though, does not really do any of them a favor by playing them 42 minutes or 43 minutes every single night in the regular season. Guys get to the playoffs, they end up being burnt out. I don't think that formula necessarily works. We'll see how it works in the playoffs. I know a lot of these guys are used to playing big-time minutes, so maybe it'll actually play to their advantage, knowing that they have to play 44 minutes today because they're used to that already in the regular season. That might be something that is an advantage for the Knicks. But I think this Pistons team is a team a lot of people are underestimating. I'm rooting for the Pistons to win this series, so that's why I'm going to take them winning here in 7 games. Like I said, they're young, athletic. I think a lot of people are underestimating this squad, and the Knicks just haven't really been able to beat good teams this season. They've struggled against teams over 500, like I noted. Now moving on to the Celtics versus the Orlando Magic, 2 versus 7. Not much to say here. I think Orlando still has some issues that they've had in the past. They still need more scoring. They're a very solid defensive team. With that being said, one of the best in the NBA in defensive ratings. But the Celtics' game plan is to shoot a ton of threes, which has worked for the most part. They might go cold one game, which is why I gave Orlando a win. But the reality is the Celtics have much more talent and too much scoring. Orlando's not going to be able to keep up in this series. I think the Celtics win this series in 5 games. Now moving on to the Western Conference, we have number 1 Oklahoma City versus number 8 Memphis. Not much to say here. Oklahoma City is too talented to lose this series. I liked Memphis a lot heading into this season, but they never really panned out like I thought they would. With Ja being healthy for a lot of this season, they didn't really ever reach their peak that I thought they would, which I know early on they were good, and then obviously things started tailing off. Memphis does play a very quick pace, which is something that Oklahoma City will have to keep up with. Oklahoma City is young and athletic. Memphis plays quick, as I said. They play the fastest average speed in the NBA, so that could stop Oklahoma City from, setting up their defense, in the half-court sets. If you're playing a lot of transition, game, that means they're going to have a better transition defense. I still think Oklahoma City is too good, though, even if they don't really set up their complete defense, and they have to, play, catch up every single time running back on defense, since Memphis does play pretty fast, and they, get shots off pretty quick. Oklahoma City is the better team here. They're a very good defensive team overall. The best defensive rating in the NBA this season was the Oklahoma City Thunder, the lowest turnover percentage in the league as well. So not only do they play the best defense, they don't turn the ball over on offense really much at all. They also averaged 21 deflections per game, 5.7 loose balls recovered per game, both of those being number one in the NBA. A lot of these guys that play with a lot of heart and a lot of hustle. I think Oklahoma City wins this series in 5 games. Now moving on to the Denver Nuggets versus the LA Clippers, the 4 seed versus the 5. Jokic may be the best player in the NBA, but Ivica Zubac has had a lot of success against Jokic in the past. And this is a stat from ESPN. With Zubac as the closest defender to Jokic, he's had 324 field goal attempts defended, which is the second most in the NBA for Jokic against any closest defender. And Jokic is only shooting 44.9% as a field goal percentage, which is the best in the NBA for any player as the closest defender against Jokic. So Zubac is holding Jokic to basically a 45% field goal percentage allowed, which is the best in the NBA as a closest defender. So he's had a lot of success against Jokic as a defensive player. I think a lot of people don't really talk about Zoo because he's not a big household name, but he is up there Defensive Player of the Year. He's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but I think he should get some votes. He's been tremendous for the Clippers in the paint this season, and it's been underrated overall on both ends. As I said, he's not a household name, so you don't really hear much about him, but he's been very good this year. The dribble handoffs between Jokic and Jamal Murray are something that Chris Dunn and Ivica Zubac are going to have to communicate on and communicate through. Jeff Van Gundy is a great defensive mind. Ty Lue is as well. I know they'll have a game plan ready to go to try to prevent that, but in the playoffs, Murray and Jokic have been great with dribble handoffs and, creating scoring opportunities for each of them, through that. So the Clippers are going to have to defend that well. 48.5% of Denver's scoring is in the paint, which is number one in the NBA. The non-Zubac minutes are going to be crucial for this team. The Clippers need Ben Simmons to step up as the backup 5 on defense. He's going to be matched up with Jokic at some point when Zoo goes to the bench. And hopefully Zoo doesn't get himself in foul trouble ever, because if he does, that would be a problem for this Clippers team. The Clippers need Zoo to stay out of foul trouble. I know that will be a game plan for Denver, is trying to get him in foul trouble to try to get him out of the game. But the non-Zubac minutes are going to be crucial for this Clippers team. Kawhi Leonard and James Harden have to be excellent at shot making. They've been doing that, obviously, the past month. They're going to have to continue that in this series and hit some big-time shots and big-time moments. Denver does have a new head coach, and obviously they had a disagreement between the former head coach and the former GM regarding the rotations that they had, specifically around Russell Westbrook minutes. Denver is still a dangerous team, but right now with the new head coach, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty. Sometimes a new head coach can shake things up and give you a spark. Sometimes teams just check out. I think this Clippers team still has to be smart, play good basketball, play smart basketball consistently. That's going to be the game plan no matter who the head coach is, no matter who's on the floor. This Clippers team, needs to be ready to go. Denver is still a dangerous team, knowing that they have Nikola Jokic. Aaron Gordon has given the Clippers trouble in the past. Same thing with Jamal Murray. Christian Brown is a very good player. He's a guy that I think is probably the X factor for Denver in this series. I think he's going to end up being their second option in this series. And if the Clippers end up using help defense against Jokic, that's going to open up some shooting around the perimeter for guys like Christian Brown, so they need to stay on him and just make sure he's not, getting a lot of open looks. With that being said, I'm going to roll with the Clippers winning this series in 6 games. The Clippers are playing the best basketball in the NBA over the past month, 18-3 over the last 21 games. 2 of those 3 losses, being against a good Oklahoma City team and a good Cleveland team. Close losses to those 2 teams as well. Then they had 1 loss over that stretch to New Orleans, which was a bad game. They always lose to New Orleans for some reason. New Orleans just always finds a way to beat the Clippers. But at the end of the day, to be on for 20 of 21 games, even winning that last game of the regular season against Golden State in overtime when the Clippers were exhausted, James Harden stepped up in big moments. This team is playing great basketball, and as I said, at the most perfect and most crucial time of the year. I'm excited to see what they do here in this playoff series. It's going to be an exciting one. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a tough battle, but I think the Clippers win this series in 6 games. Like I mentioned, they have been on for 20 of the last 21 games, which is very, very impressive. Doesn't matter who you're playing, to be on for 20 games out of 21 is not easy to do. Now moving on to the LA Lakers versus the Minnesota Timberwolves, the 3 seed versus the 6 in the West. The Lakers don't lack star power at all. LeBron James, Luka Doncic, obviously 2 superstar talents. They've played together much better than I expected they would. I thought this team wouldn't really work well, but they've been better than I thought they would be. Austin Reeves has been hooping this year. He's impressed me. It seems like LeBron and Luka, though, defer to Reeves in big-time moments, so I'm interested to see what happens in the playoffs when there's a big-time moment. Is it going to be LeBron taking the shot? Is it going to be Luka taking the shot? Is it going to be them deferring to Reeves because he is, a less defender on him? I'm excited to see what that, ends up being in the playoffs. It'll be interesting seeing that all 3 players could score the ball. It'll be interesting to see, what they draw up, in a big-time moment with the clipboard. The issue for the Lakers, though, is their interior and their depth. Here's the problem, and this is why I worried about this team when they made that trade for Luka Doncic. You lose Anthony Davis, you're losing a big part of the paint. He's an anchor defensively and obviously on the glass. I worry about this Lakers team with size in the paint. Rebounding is going to be an issue in this series for the Lakers, in my opinion. And even if the Wolves go small ball, they still have 5 guys that could cover the Lakers probably 1 through 5. If Gobert's off the floor, they have 5 guys that really don't have to worry about switching that much. Maybe Naz Reid in a certain situation, but that would be 1 through 5. They would have guys that wouldn't necessarily have to switch every single play there's a screen. And they'd still get some rebounds as well because Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker all have pretty good size. So I think size is going to be a problem for this Lakers team. And the Lakers' role plays are shaky, in my opinion. Dalton Connect, Jared Vanderbilt, Gabe Vincent. I know they've shown up in some moments, and the same thing with Jackson Hayes. They've showed up in some moments, help that team win some games. But I don't really believe they can have a big-time role on a championship-winning team. Maybe Jackson Hayes will have a little bit bigger of a role and be a little bit more reliable. And I know Vanderbilt has shown some success in the past as well. But Connect and Vincent, a little bit shaky. I just don't see them being reliable in this series. The Wolves need to play aggressive defense and set the tone against Luka. On any pick and rolls, they cannot switch. They need to just stay. Whoever's on Luka, just keep them on him. Luka has been excellent when defenses choose to play drop coverage against him. So Minnesota cannot play drop coverage against Luka. He just scores the ball just about every single time, it seems like. Minnesota has the defensive length and a ton of height to make things tough on the Lakers. Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Rudy Gobert, all excellent defensive players. And obviously Anthony Edwards is a superstar, potentially the next face of the NBA alongside Victor Wembanyama. We saw Edwards put up big-time numbers last year in the playoffs and lead Minnesota over Phoenix and Denver. And despite being, counted out against both of those teams, he showed them in big-time moments and obviously led them, all the way through to the Western Conference Finals last year. And this Minnesota team is kind of under the radar. No one's really talking about them, which I know the Clippers are getting a lot of hype right now, which I don't really like at the end of the day. I think the Clippers benefited this year by being under the radar. Once Paul George left, they were under the radar, lower expectations, than they've had during that 2-13 era where when you have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, the expectations were to win every single year when you had those guys on the roster. Once Paul George left, expectations around the Clippers were low. Not many people really expected the Clippers to be good this season, and so a lot of people counted them out all year long, which I think played to their advantage. And now a lot of the light is now on the Clippers. They're getting a lot of attention, and a lot of people are starting to think the Clippers can make a run in the West, which honestly is a little concerning. I think it's great that people are starting to respect them and give them more attention and more praise. But at the end of the day, I think the Clippers played better with the chip on their shoulder and being a team that everybody counted out before the season began. And in relation to Minnesota, Minnesota's playing great over that same stretch. They're 18-4 over their last 22 games. But they're not really getting the hype that the Clips are getting, which I think might play to their advantage, honestly, being under the radar. Julius Randle has been contributing a lot over the last 21 games, 18 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, off 40% shooting from 3. If he can be their X factor and be a consistent scoring sidekick next to Anthony Edwards, this team could be pretty dangerous against this Lakers team. But I've seen Randle go cold in the playoffs, so you can't really always rely on him. But at the end of the day, I'm going to predict Minnesota winning this series in 7 games. Now moving on to the number 2 Houston Rockets versus the number 7 Golden State Warriors. I like Houston a lot. Alperon Şengün, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green. I like these guys a lot, but the issue is that they're a young squad going up against a team full of veterans who have been here before. Jimmy Butler's been to the NBA Finals a couple times. And then obviously Golden State has 4 rings with Steph Curry and Draymond Green. And Golden State's playing great hoops at the right time. They've been very good since trading with Jimmy Butler. I think it's going to be tough for Houston to stop Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler when they're clicking. I think Golden State wins this series in 6 games. Now moving on to the second round, we have number 1 Oklahoma City versus number 5 LA Clippers. The Clippers did lose 4 times to Oklahoma City in the regular season, with their last matchup being a thriller down to the wire. So I do think the Clippers have what it takes to, make a run in the West and compete with anybody, and I think they can keep it close with Oklahoma City, especially considering the Clippers have got hot at the right time, at the right moment, just like Dallas did last year. And Dallas obviously did beat Oklahoma City in the second round last season. But I think the issue with this Clippers team is that I think it's going to be tough against Oklahoma City's defense. OKC's defense is elite, and they can make things tough on James Harden and force him to, make some tough decisions and turn the ball over. Turnovers would be an issue in this series for the Clippers against Oklahoma City. I think Oklahoma City being young and athletic is definitely something I worry about, and they've just had the Clippers number over the last couple seasons, it seems like. And ever since they made that trade, it seems like they just always beat the Clippers. But I think when you look at this team, this Clippers team, I think they're capable of beating anybody, like I noted. When you have a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. and Chris Dunn, who are very good defensive anchors, with Ivica Zubac obviously being the guy in the paint. And then around the perimeter, you have Derrick Jones Jr. and Chris Dunn. And Chris Dunn's been one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA over the last couple seasons. Doesn't get enough credit as he should. And he's been shooting very well for the Clippers. Been a very underrated scorer for this team over the past month. In the limited shots he's got, he's honestly showed up in some big moments for them. I know a lot of teams like to leave him open at the three-point line, and then he likes to drive in and maybe have a floater. That would be huge this series for the Clippers. When you have Chris Dunn out there or Ben Simmons, teams like to seg off of those guys, and force them to either shoot the ball or, potentially leave that guy open, seg off of them so they can double up somebody else. Ben Simmons is going to have to step up in this series. If the Clippers do get past Denver, Oklahoma City won't be easy. They will need Ben Simmons to step up off the bench as that backup five and the backup point guard. They will need him to step up in big moments. I think Oklahoma City's defense, though, as I said, is the worry for me in this series. I'm going to go with Oklahoma City winning this series in 6. If I pick the Clippers like I have in just about every single year, I feel like I would jinx them. And plus, Oklahoma City is really good. The Clippers did lose 4 times to them. But with that being said, I think this team is capable of beating this Thunder team. But I feel like I'd be a jinx if I take the Clippers, to win this series here in my prediction. And secondly, I do think Oklahoma City would be a worry for them. Defensively, obviously. And then they're young and they're quick. And obviously they hustle a lot, get a lot of loose balls, get a lot of deflections. So I worry about the Clippers in this series if they get, to play Oklahoma City. But with that being said, Oklahoma City is very young. Just like last year, we saw some faults, in their game that Dallas took advantage of. And that's not really having a secondary scorer. Jalen Williams is a very good player, and he's a very good sidekick with SGA. But I still think they need a second guy that can go off, let's say, 24, 25 points per game per night. I know Williams isn't far off from that. He's averaging 22 points per game. But if you add another scorer and have them as the second option, Williams is your third, and then Holmgren is your fourth, you're starting to build like a roster like the Celtics have, with Derek White being the fourth option some nights, Drew Holiday being the fifth option, Porzingis being the third option, Jaylen Brown being the second option, and Tatum being the first option. Oklahoma City is going to start building something like that, I think, at the end of the day. I think they need one more, star piece that can score, have them as the second option next to SGA. Then you put Jalen Williams as your third option and Chet Holmgren as your fourth option, and you're building a similar roster type to what the Celtics, had last year when they won the NBA Finals, and, a very similar roster type that they have right now, as a contender in the East. And that OKC team, like I said, they have a lot of draft picks they can go out and move and obviously get some extra star talent next to SGA and Jalen Williams. With all of that being said, though, Oklahoma City, I do think they're probably the best team in the West. But the best team doesn't always necessarily win at the end of the day. It's whatever team's playing the hardest at the right time. Like I noted, this Clippers team is just as good as any NBA team has been over the past 3 or 4 weeks. 18-3, as I said, since, March 5th, I think it was, against that Phoenix team, or it was March 4th when they blew that loss, to Phoenix. I do think this Clippers team, when Kawhi Leonard is playing like he has been, and he's looking like the Toronto Kawhi Leonard of old, where you put, Toronto on his back and won the NBA Finals ring for them, I think this is a similar situation for Kawhi where he's essentially the main guy. He has a good surrounding cast like he did in Toronto, but he's the main guy, and he's looking like he did back then. Very confident offensively, can do whatever he wants on the defensive end. Kawhi Leonard looks electric and looks like he has a lot of juice left in the tank the way he's been playing. I know a lot of people disrespected him early on in the season. Stephen A was saying he should retire, and everybody was shouting that he should retire, but this is why Kawhi Leonard rested a little bit, in the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season, is to be playing his best basketball right now. He played 68 games in the regular season last year, and then obviously got hurt, the playoffs rolled around. That didn't work out, so they wanted to mix things up, try to change up the formula, and obviously this year it did work. He's playing his best basketball at the right time, as the Clippers are as a whole, and he's just looked phenomenal in the mid-range game, driving, hitting some big-time shots, some fadeaways, shooting the three, playing great defensively, hustling back on defense. Like, he has looked awesome, and has looked like a top 10 player in the NBA over the past month. And as I said, he's averaging just about 25 points per game over that stretch for the Clippers, since their 18-3 stretch. I think if Kawhi Leonard continues to play like that, he could be a real force to be reckoned with in this series against the Thunder. I think he would be something that they would worry about. If he's rolling against Denver and we end up beating Denver, let's say, in 5 or 6 games, and we're going into Oklahoma City, I don't think they're necessarily going to be happy they're playing the Clippers. They'd probably be a little nervous with the way that the Clippers have looked. But I don't want to get too much ahead of myself. I know anything can happen in the playoffs. I know some of my predictions can be way off. And I know I've jinxed the Clippers in the past. So I think Oklahoma City wins this series in 6 games. But I wouldn't be surprised if this Clippers team gave the Thunder all they could handle in this series. And if Kawhi Leonard continues to play like he has been, watch out. As I said, this team, is a team that everybody would worry about in the West. Just like Indiana is the team that I think everybody should worry about in the East. The Clippers are the team everybody should worry about in the West. With the way Kawhi Leonard and James Harden have looked, they've been dominant. So we'll see how things work out But I'm going to go with Oklahoma City, taking the series in 6 games. Now moving on to number 6, Minnesota versus number 7, Golden State. No one expects Minnesota to get to this point, but if they do, they would have the defense that could match up well with Golden State, in my opinion. Minnesota's won 18 of their last 22 games. You can't deny that run. Golden State issue has been second chance points, in my opinion, at least over the past couple weeks when I've watched. That's been something that's been an issue for them. That was something that hurt them in the regular season finale versus the Clippers, was trying to rebound, on the defensive end. They gave us a lot of second chance offensive, rebounds to the Clippers. Scoring depth could be an issue for the Warriors if Steph Curry and, Jimmy Butler have off nights. The Warriors are 23-8 since the Jimmy Butler trade, so they've been playing really good basketball as of late too. Minnesota, Golden State, the Clippers, all getting hot at the right time. I think Golden State wins the series in 6 games. And then we have number 1, Cleveland versus number 4, Indiana. 2 teams I like a lot, 2 teams I'd root for. I think Indiana can make things really tough on Cleveland. They did beat the Cavs 3 or 4 times in the regular season. I know 2 of those games, the Cavs rested their starters for the most part. But Indiana does have the wings and the scoring depth to make it tough on anybody in the East or even in the West. I do think this Cavs team, they're the better team, and at their height and their peak, I think they're the best team in the NBA due to their mix of elite scoring and defense. You have 2 great scorers in Garland and Donovan Mitchell. And then you also have 2 great defensive players in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Then you're adding in another scorer in DeAndre Hunter and another good player, Isaac Okoro. And then also another good player in Max Strus who could shoot the 3 well. I think this team is an interesting team, Cleveland. I think they're meshing together very well at the right time this year. Just everything really came together for them. And, the puzzle pieces started to fit, and everything started to click. I think the Cavaliers would have a really tough time with this Indiana team. Like I said, Indiana's a team I don't think anybody wants to play in the East. Or maybe Indiana's a team I don't think anybody should want to play in the East. Because I think everybody's underestimating them against this Milwaukee team that they're playing in the first round. I think Indiana's a much better team than Milwaukee. And as I said, they've beat a lot of good teams over the past month. I think Indiana could beat in this series with Cleveland. I think it goes 7 games. I'm going to give the Cleveland Cavaliers the edge. I've been a fan of them over the last couple seasons since I love Donovan Mitchell. But I do think this Indiana team has what it takes to make a deep run. Really good head coach, and then obviously a good mix of wings and scoring depth. You add a guy like Pascal Siakam who can fit in any lineup, a defensive anchor, Miles Turner, and then some good young pieces like Benedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard. They could definitely make things interesting in the Eastern Conference. Then we have the number 6 Detroit Pistons versus the number 2 Boston Celtics. If Detroit gets to the second round, that's a major win for this franchise. Even making the playoffs this year, when no one gave them a chance before the season began, is very impressive. Their turnaround from last year to this season has been fun to watch and something that they deserve. They obviously had a lot of young players go through a lot of tough times there in Detroit. Obviously having, a record-breaking, losing streak last year, and then obviously being, one of the worst teams in NBA history record-wise. But then this year, just a major jump for them. I was early on them by a year. I thought last year they were going to make a step up in the East, and be a playoff team. I was a year early on them, but at the end of the day, they're on track right now. And this is what I saw from them a couple years ago, and I thought they were going to figure things out heading into last year. This is what I saw them being at some point. A young team, athletic team, like they've been. A team that can, build around those young pieces like Jalen Duren, like Jaden Ivey, like Cade Cunningham, which I know Ivey's been hurt. But I do like this young core of players, Cunningham, Ivey, Duren, Asad Thompson. I like this core of players. They're starting to, get some of those draft picks right, which is awesome to see. I think an issue with this Celtics team is that they've not had a complete consistent lineup over the last 3 or 4 months, always having guys in or out of the lineup or injured. That's been tough, obviously. I mean, I think at the end of the day, when they're all on the floor, they're a very talented team and probably the most talented team in the East, maybe. But I do know they're banking on a couple things. Obviously, Jaylen Brown's knee being ready to go. You're always banking on Kristaps Porzingis to be healthy. And then you need Jason Tatum to show up, which I know last year they won the finals. And even if Tatum or Brown had a bad night, someone else stepped up, whether it was Drew Holiday or Porzingis or Pritchard. But I do think it's a worry that this team hasn't really had a complete, consistent lineup. With that being said, they're the better team than Detroit. I'm going to take the Celtics winning the series in 5 games. But I do think if the Celtics struggle with Detroit in this series, it would be because of fast break points and points in the paint. 2 things that Detroit does very well, in the top 5 in the league for. If Tatum or Brown are on the bench and the Pacers want to push the ball up the floor and get, let's say, Jalen Duren involved or Isaiah Stewart involved in the paint, that could be a problem if Cornette's, out there and he's struggling against a guy like Isaiah Stewart or Jalen Duren. Because I know when Porzingis is out there, obviously he's the main piece in the paint. But you're going to have to bank on Kornet to be good off the bench, considering this Pistons team can score in the paint pretty well. They're one of the best teams in the NBA in that regard. So now moving on to the conference finals, I have Golden State versus Oklahoma City. I think Golden State wins the series in 7 games. I could see Golden State losing anywhere between the first round, second round, or even the conference finals. Like this team, the way they've played, they've looked great. But you can see some holes in this team's game, like against that Clippers team. I think a lack of scoring was an issue at times, even in that game. If Steph Curry goes cold at some point, you need Jimmy Butler to step up, which Jimmy's been great in the playoffs. If you see the playoff Jimmy we've seen in Miami, Golden State will be set up perfectly, and I think that's something that they're really hoping for and banking on. But if Steph Curry struggles, turning the ball over, especially like he did against the Clippers, and also the depth becomes an issue scoring, I could see Golden State losing earlier than the conference finals, or even in the second round of the first round. Like I could see this team lose anywhere along the way, but I do think if they make it this far, I think they have what it takes to win the NBA Finals. But the reason I'm taking them here against Oklahoma City is because I've watched this team play probably 5 or 6 times in April because they're on TV most nights, and I always tune into whatever NBA game is on, the 7 o'clock window, the 10 o'clock window. I'm always watching NBA games every single night. And I saw a legitimate contender when I watched this team play. They have obviously a lot of good vets, Draymond Green, Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and then they have some good, young players as well. Podziemski's pretty good. Moses Moody plays his role pretty well. Gary Payton, the second, plays his role well off the bench. And then you add in a guy like Quinton Post, who's a rookie, who's been really good at stretching the floor for them off the bench this year and shooting the ball. Oklahoma City, still a very young team. I think going up against a team that's very experienced in the playoffs at Golden State would be a tough matchup for them. But they're a very good defensive team. Oklahoma City could beat anybody. I could be completely wrong with any of these predictions, and I completely understand that. But I'm going to take Golden State in 7 games here, and then I have Cleveland versus Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals, which I always felt like would be the playoff matchup this year. I thought Cleveland, would end up being this team that they are right now. I thought they would be last year. I was a year early on them. I was a year early on Detroit. But I've always been high on Cleveland. I've always thought they've had what it takes to make a deep run in the playoffs, and I think this is the year that everything starts clicking for them. With Jaylen Brown's knee injury, I think that's a worry to me. I know he didn't really want to comment much to the media about it. It seems like he's going to still play, but he's still going to be a little bit banged up. I think this Cleveland team has what it takes to make a run in the East. I'm going to take them over Boston in 6 games. And then in the finals, I would take Cleveland over Golden State in 6 games with Darius Garland as my MVP. Like I mentioned, I compare him to Jaylen Brown, a guy that a lot of people gave up on, and then they made a deep run when the team finally put things together and they won the NBA Finals. The guy that everybody gave up on ended up being the MVP. So I think Garland could be that potential guy this year in the finals if Cleveland does end up making it there. Cleveland's offense has been sensational all year long. I do like their depth and a lot of those guys off the bench. Adding DeAndre Hunter and having another scorer is huge. They don't really have many gaps in scoring because they have so many scorers that could shoot the mid-range, drive, shoot the 3. They're a very dynamic team. So I'm going to take Cleveland over Golden State in 6 games. As I said, Golden State, scoring depth might be a little bit of an issue when it's not Steph Curry and it's not Jimmy Butler. You never know who necessarily is going to be that third option. Some nights it might be a guy like Podziemski. Other nights it might be a guy like even Quinton Post has had some nights where he was, one of their top 3 scorers. Could be Draymond Green potentially, which I know he shot the 3 ball very well from the corner this year. That could be something he does in the playoffs. I know I might be completely off with a lot of these predictions. Anything can happen in the NBA playoffs. That's the beauty of the NBA. That's the beauty of sports. You never know how things are going to play out. So I know I could be completely wrong with any of these things. I'm obviously rooting for the Clippers in the West, as you guys know. I'm a big Clippers fan. And then in the East, I honestly like the Pacers a lot. I like the Cavs a lot. If they matched up at some point in the Eastern Conference playoffs, that would be an awesome series to watch, in my opinion. I think that would go 7 games. It'd be a nail-biter right down to the wire. The Clippers and the Pacers are my 2 most dangerous teams. The Clippers are the most dangerous team in the West that I don't think anybody should want to play. And then in the East, I don't think anybody should want to play the Pacers. I think they're an underrated team that can make serious noise. Once again, I could be completely wrong with any of this. That's the beauty of the playoffs. You never know what's going to happen, how things are going to play out. But I think the Pacers, with being a very well-coached team, having good defense, and obviously having a lot of scoring potential with a lot of guys, that can score the ball, whether it be Nembhard or Siakam or Halliburton or even Miles Turner sometimes cleaning up on the offensive glass. They have a lot of guys that can score, and then the same goes for the Clippers. The Clippers have a lot of guys that can step up in moments, whether it's Powell, Harden, Zoo, or Kawhi. I think those 2 teams are the most dangerous teams in the East, in the West. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Enjoy the NBA playoffs, and best of luck to all of your teams. Have a good one.